our program today. This discussion is the very first in what we plan to be a series of forums dealing with major issues currently facing society and the university community. We in the library, as knowledge curators and providers in a community of knowledge seekers and knowledge contributors, envision these forums first as a mechanism to inform the university community about major societal issues, drawing upon the university's own wealth of expertise, and second, as a means to provide an open exchange of knowledge and ideas on these issues. We believe that the university has a critical role to play in helping society to address and progress and make progress on these issues. We further believe that the library has an important role to play in supporting the university's teaching and research efforts on these topics. Thus, we hope that these forums will not only foster ongoing discussion on these topics, but also generate an understanding of and appreciation for the different research, teaching, and practical perspectives that our diverse faculty and community members bring to this conversation. Today's forum addresses the issue of income inequality. In the last few months, income inequality has become a hot topic of discussion for government leaders, those seeking political office, business leaders, social activists, and economic consultants. While often we see and hear income inequality discussed as though it were a simple problem with a simple solution, it is in fact a phenomenon that is complex in both its origin and impact. So we have brought together today 5 panelists to help us understand some of the complexities of income inequality from their research and teaching perspectives. They are going to help us get a grasp on what income inequality is, what causes it, how it affects each of us, and how we might approach addressing different aspects of the problem. The moderator for our forum today is Eric Lindquist. Eric is the librarian responsible for several areas, including American Studies and History. I will let Eric introduce himself and the panel members, but before I leave the podium, I want to thank Eric and the panel members for giving us their insights today. I also want to thank Lily Greiner, over here in the yellow, for her work in developing and coordinating the forum today. So thank you, Lily. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. We're very happy to see such a large turnout, and I hope that you will find the session informative and that you will give us feedback on this forum and others that you might like to see in the future. So thank you, and I hope you have a great program.
Thanks. My name is Eric Lindquist. I'm as Gary always said, a librarian here, and I'll be serving as moderator. I promise to keep my remarks short, but since the UMD libraries are sponsoring this event and we are meeting in the main university library, I cannot resist pointing out that well more than 150 books about income inequality have been published so far in 2015. And at least another 8 are already set for publication in 2016. In addition, there must be thousands of articles. Everyone is aware that income inequality is a major issue, and these publication figures are one good measure of that. I would like to also, I just want to give some plaudits to Lily, as Gary already did. Lily is the principal organizer of this event. She averages at least one big idea a week, and it is a great idea. It's great to see this one come to fruition. Okay, income inequality is a subject that can be approached from multiple perspectives, and it is appropriate that our cast of distinguished speakers represent a wide range of disciplines. We will begin with remarks by 5 faculty members, whom I will introduce shortly. After their remarks, we will have about 20 minutes for questions and discussion. Toward the end of the forum, 4 librarians will talk briefly about library resources for the study of income inequality. The forum officially ends at 1:30, but you are all invited to stay around and talk informally with our speakers and with one another afterwards. Our 5 distinguished faculty members represent not just 5 separate departments, but 5 separate colleges and schools on campus, another measure of the importance and reach of this subject. All 5 have had distinguished careers and boast impressive records of publication, research, and teaching. So I'm going to introduce all 5 of them very briefly, and then they will all make their remarks one after another. Charles E. Olson is professor of the practice and director of the Business Honors Program in the Robert H. School of Business. He will be speaking about trends, causes, consequences, and appropriate policy responses. Bradley Boekeloo, I hope I got that fairly correct, is professor of behavioral and community health in the School of Public Health and director of the Prevention Research Center. He will speak about the connection of health disparities to income inequality. Ethan Kaplan is Associate Professor of Economics and is also affiliated with the Maryland Population Research Center. His subject will be historical shifts in income distribution and its causes. Christopher Foreman is professor in the School of Public Policy and director of its social policy program. He will talk about major challenges in the overlapping varieties of inequality and an emerging School of Public Policy initiative. Ruth Zambrana is professor of women's studies, director of the Consortium on Race, Gender, and Ethnicity, and interim director of U.S. Latino Studies Initiative at the University of Maryland. Her subject is income and inequality, race, Hispanic, ethnicity, and gender. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm a behavioral scientist in the School of Public Health, and I focus on HIV prevention. And income level, but not income inequality, are often studied in the context of HIV. So I really appreciate this opportunity to learn more about income inequality. What I'm going to talk about is income inequality and public health. As you can see in this figure, the y-axis includes Gini coefficients from 0.3 to 0.46, and the x-axis includes the years from 1947 to 2007. The Gini coefficient is the most used measure of income inequality. It varies from 0 to 1, where 0 represents complete equality, the hypothetical condition that income is distributed equally across the population, and 1 represents maximum inequality, the hypothetical condition that one person holds all income. This figure shows that income inequality has tended to increase in the US since about 1967. As can be seen in the graph, the Gini score in the United States in 2007 was about 0.44. From 2007 to the present, the Gini coefficient has remained high. In 2013, the Gini was about 0.41 in the United States, according to the World Bank. The correlation between income inequality and health has been shown in numerous studies. In this graph, we see that Gini scores across states in the recent past have been quite high, with almost all 50 states having a Gini above 0.3. A Gini of 0.3 and above is believed by some, based on past research, to be the threshold at which inequality is considered a risk to public health. The graph shows that as states' Gini coefficients increase above the 0.3 threshold, the states also tend to have higher mortality rates. The impact of state income inequality has been observed for a number of mortality outcomes. Health outcomes with steep socioeconomic gradients, in this graph indicated by high correlation with income, are more sensitive to income inequality. In other words, mortality outcomes that are highly correlated with income level also tend to have higher correlation with income inequality. Infant mortality, respiratory disease, all-cause mortality among the elderly, heart disease, homicide, and all-cause mortality among working-age adults were all correlated with lower county income and were higher among states with more income inequality. It should be noted that counties with the same income levels may have different mortality rates due to the contextual effect of income inequality. Breast cancer, prostate cancer, and alcoholic liver disease had little correlation with income levels and showed little or no contextual effect of income inequality. Therefore, many, but not all, health outcomes might be expected to be influenced by income inequality. While smaller area studies, for example, counties in American states, show health effects of income inequality, the strongest correlations between income inequality and health have been observed when studying country-level inequality with multi-outcome health indices. Using a health index that combines life expectancy, mental illness, obesity, infant mortality, teenage births, homicides, imprisonment, educational entertainment, distrust, and social mobility, countries with higher income inequality scored higher on the index of health problems. Note the relatively high income inequality in the United States among rich countries, and its relatively high score for health and social problems. One could argue that among the most important public health outcomes is level of happiness in the population. As was shown earlier, Gini coefficients have tended to increase in the United States since the late 1960s. In this figure, we see that as Gini has tended to increase from 1972 to 2008 in the United States, happiness has tended to decrease. The highest happiness was measured during the late 1970s. The lowest happiness was measured during the most recent years of this figure. As was shown earlier, income inequality has an impact on health beyond the impact of income level. In this table, we see that decreased happiness of lower income individuals in the years with greater income inequality was also not explained by reduced income. Decreased happiness of lower income individuals in the years with greater income inequality was explained by lack of perceived fairness and general trust. Nevertheless, the richest top 20% income group, for them, fairness and trust played no role in explaining happiness. The authors of this study concluded that income growth that is not accompanied by an increase in income inequality is likely to result in an increase in the mean happiness of the general population, while income growth that is accompanied by increased income inequality is likely to result in a decrease in happiness. Economic growth has been associated with an increase in happiness over time in many nations, such as Denmark, France, and Germany, but not in the United States. One problem contributing to lower happiness appears to be the lack of trust and perceived fairness that accompanies income inequality. Income inequality, perceived unfairness, and lack of trust by lower socioeconomic groups may be important barriers to improved health in the United States. A number of other mechanisms have been posited as explaining the effect of income inequality on public health. To date, no one mechanism has been proved or disproved, and multiple mechanisms may be at play. The potential mechanisms include the relative size of a lower status population living under material disadvantage and greater exposure to health hazards, feeling less valued, leading to less self-care, perceiving social disadvantage, feeling anxious, and suffering from stress-related endocrine disease outcomes, and suffering from disadvantage at key stages of growth and development. And finally, suffering from social policies that produce the income inequalities to begin with, such as unequal power, structural disadvantage, and stigma.
All right. Three pieces to my discussion today. First, a brief disclaimer, and then a set of observations that are relevant, I think, to this discussion, to this broad discussion, and then some information about what we are doing in the School of Public Policy. First, the disclaimer. When I was asked to participate in this panel last May, I was a bit reluctant because I don't do income inequality as such, as a research field, and no one in my school has a research agenda that is directly on point. Such persons are, as most of you know, concerned about and avidly arguing about the skewing of income and wealth to persons at the top 1% or the top 1/10 of 1% or even top 1/100th of 1% of the national distributions. And there's a lot of debate about the validity of these estimates and what sort of counting is being done and what kind of comparisons are being made. But there does seem to be a consensus about a couple of claims. One is that overall wealth has become more concentrated in the United States, and secondly, that middle-class incomes have stagnated since the early 1970s. So, we in the School of Public Policy are attentive to this income inequality discourse, but we are not really contributing to it precisely at this time. Our careers and interests have taken us in other directions, and so, frankly, we don't have the horses in our stable to pull the income inequality wagon. Other people clearly do. But, this said, many of us have a great deal of concern about policy problems that we take to be associated with inequality in various ways. Some of us teach and conduct research addressing these problems: poverty, discriminatory treatment by individuals and by legal or administrative systems, disparities in education, employment, and environmental conditions, exposure to corrupt governance. These and much else are all, to be sure, inequalities that matter, but they don't track precisely with the rather different topic of income inequality as it is generally discussed. There's a relationship, but it doesn't track precisely. Now, part two. Let me give you 4 observations about the United States and sort of why I see us in this general problem of inequality, including income inequality. 4 observations. One is we're a market economy. The market has limits, but it is essential. The market economy can provide many wonderful things, but equality is not one of them. Indeed, the very operation of markets is premised on the assumption that dynamism and growth necessitate a culling of weak, inefficient, or unresponsive players. A second point. The United States, you may have noticed, is extraordinarily fragmented as a polity. Whether one buys into various kinds of pluralism or not, the fact is that this fragmentation makes coordinated national effort against any problem, including inequality in any of its manifestations, extremely difficult. 50 states, I'm going to recite what you probably many of you know. 50 states, 3,000 counties, 12,500 local police departments, including, most of those 12,500 having 10 or fewer officers, 13,500 school districts, 13,500. Here in Maryland, we're accustomed to the idea that a county is coterminous with a school district. Prince George's County is a school district. Montgomery County is a school district. Go to New York. That's all I say. Just go to New York. 62 counties, 950 school districts. I leave that to your imagination. 37,000 special district governments and all the rest, and all that means is that trying to create equality is extremely daunting. Thirdly, diversity is lovely, but it is also challenging. We've got 315 to 320 million citizens. They come from a variety of different places, and trying to get all of those individuals tracked onto a path that leads to greater uplift for all of them has proven extremely difficult. You may have noticed this is not Denmark, this is not Sweden. The state of Maryland, as I often remind my students, the state of Maryland has roughly the same population as Denmark and has, I think, a little bit more diversity. We also have political culture. You may love it, you may hate it, but in some respects, with respect to diversity, we are burdened by a political culture that is highly anti-statist and highly individualistic. Fourth observation is that institutions are vulnerable to strategy, but there's also an enormous amount of complexity built into institutions and how you manage them. And I will, simply getting from elections to statutes, to regulations, to outputs, to outcomes, as anyone who has studied public policy, as all my colleagues know, that this is extremely problematic. The final thing I want to say in the last, I think, 90 seconds that I have available is that we in the School of Public Policy are not income inequality people, but we care about inequality. As I said, we are engaged in what we think of at the moment as a Prince George's County initiative. That is to say, the turf at our doorstep. We know that Prince George's County is an area that is burdened, as many places are, by an enormous amount of income and other varieties of inequality, and we are thinking aggressively. Some of my colleagues here are engaged with me in this process, thinking aggressively about what kinds of things we can do by way of things that a policy school faculty can do, which is teaching, research, and perhaps some intervention to make a difference and move the needle on some indicators of concern. We don't know exactly what we will be doing, but stay tuned, and if you're interested, please come and work with us. Stay attentive to what we're up to, and anyone who wishes can certainly email me, and I'd be happy to let you in on what we are up to. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a an issue that I am very interested in and that I care a lot about. So I prepared about 2 hours worth of information. Let's see how much I get through. The one thing I probably will not get to, so I want to just say this up front, is I think there are a lot of ways to address income inequality, from substantial increases in the minimum wage to substantial increases in wage and capital income taxation, going back to our greatest area of growth in the 1950s, where the top marginal tax rates were 91% back then. And also increased union representation of workers. But what I really want to focus on in the very small amount of time that I have to me is talking a little bit about the facts of income inequality, the different types of income inequality, and the changes that have happened in the United States. I'm talking about domestic inequality. Obviously, there's incredible inequality across countries. So the changes that have happened over the last century. So first of all, there's two types of income. There's income that you get from owning things, stocks, bonds, businesses, rents from real estate, royalties. And then there's also income that you get from working, wages, salaries, bonuses, stock options. It used to be that roughly about 2/3 of income came from working, and about 1/3 went to people who owned. Now it's closer to 60% for working and 40% who's owned. There's been an increase in the share of income that goes to people who own, or what's called the capital share. There's really three ways that inequality can go up. One is capital inequality can increase. And second is that wage inequality can increase. And the other one is that the capital share of income can increase. The capital share of income increasing tends to increase inequality because the people who predominantly own capital are very, very wealthy, so an increase in their share of income increases inequality. Historically, over the last century, what's happened? Well, and when I say over the last century, I'm thinking roughly since the Great Depression. So capital income inequality has actually fallen dramatically. It's not had a huge aggregate impact on inequality, but it has fallen. Wage inequality has risen substantially, and that's the overriding factor driving total inequality changes. And then lastly, the capital share has risen modestly in the last 30 years or so. Okay. A more detailed historical overview. In the 1940s, there was huge compression in income. Actually, starting in 1929, the crash in the stock market, because it destroyed a lot of financial wealth of very wealthy people, did actually compress income inequality. But in the early 1940s, FDR, also Nixon did this in the 70s, put in wage controls, and particularly for high-income individuals, and that seemed to have a huge effect on inequality and on wage inequality, and that's been very persistent. In the 1950s and 60s, there was pretty much stability. In the 1970s, there started to be a slight rise in inequality, but actually not in all dimensions. So, for instance, the gap between those with a college degree and those with a high school degree narrowed substantially during the 70s. In the 80s, there was a huge increase in inequality, and particularly at the bottom end. So, low-end workers, over 15 years ended up a lot worse off. Over half of the population ended up a lot worse off in terms of the real value of the wages that they earned. In the 1990s, the bottom end actually starts to do a little better, and the middle does not so well, but there was a huge rise in top end inequality, particularly the people who constitute a lot of the top 0.1% of the income distribution, namely financiers working in finance and executives. And in the 2000s, there's largely been stagnation. Let's see. So here's a picture. The important thing to look at is that the most extreme thing that you see fluctuating, these black triangles, that's the share of the top 1% in income. And before the Great Depression, it peaked out about 20% of total income went to 1% of the population. By 1998, it went then down to like 8%. By 1998, it increased back to 14%. Just before the crash in 2008, it actually had increased again to about 23%. But that's not on this graph. So it's actually higher than it was before the Great Depression. So what's led to to capital inequality reduction? Well, largely two things. One is the rise in pension plans. It used to be that only a very small number of extremely wealthy individuals owned capital and they own businesses. Now a lot of people own very small parts of a lot of different businesses through their pension plans. And the other thing is that really you've seen the disappearance of the capitalist who doesn't work. Most people, even in the very top echelons of the income distribution now also work. They earn a lot of capital income, but they also earn a lot of wage income. Having said that, it's still true that capital is incredibly concentrated. So the top 0.01%, so about 30,000 individuals in the United States, owns 11% of the wealth. The top 0.1%, 22% of the wealth. The top 1%, the top 10% owns about 75% of the wealth. The bottom 90% owns 25% of the wealth. The bottom 50% owns basically nothing. Whoops. Okay. The capital share, the capital share of income has been rising modestly. This bottom graph here is the capital share. It turns out that it depends upon whether you account for depreciation. It doesn't rise as much, and there's a debate about how you do that. I'm not going to get into that, but there's been a slight increase in the capital share of income in the United States, a little more pronounced in Europe. Wage inequality has been the real driver of wage inequality increases, and basically there are people who believe that it was technology in the 80s and 90s, and then trade with China in the 2000s, and then other people who believe that it's largely due to the large reduction in taxes on the wealthy under the Reagan administration, a lack of increase in the minimum wage, deunionization, and outsourcing. What you can see here in this graph is that the top dotted line is top end inequality. It's the ratio of people at the 90th percentile to the 50th percentile, and that's gone up throughout from 1975 straight through the 2000s. The bottom end inequality, you see this pronounced increase that I talked about in the 80s, and then you've actually seen some reduction of inequality at the bottom end in the 90s as the middle class has done really poorly starting in the 90s. And then just, I'll finish that, there are other countries who do things differently in the United States. In Northern Europe in particular, countries like Sweden, but even countries like Germany, and they rely a lot more heavily on capital, on taxation of wages, on financial regulation, which reins in income to executives and to people in finance. They have higher minimum wages, much higher unionization rates. And so I think that, and over the time period in which these countries have implemented these policies, they've actually grown slightly slower than the United States, but because people have worked less. If you actually look at labor productivity, how much people, the growth in how much people make per hour, their productivity growth looks pretty much identical to the United States. So I do think that you can put in policies that substantially reduce inequality without causing large-scale unemployment and large-scale sluggish growth. Thank you very much.
In case you weren't able to see my sign up there, I'm Charles Olson. I'm from the business school. And I'm also going to start out with a disclaimer. We don't have a lot of research that's going on in the business school, even though we're a very large unit, that I am familiar with. Further, as representative from the business school, the views I'm presenting are my own. I haven't cleared my remarks with the dean or anyone else in the administration, so I'm saying what I think. Many of you are probably aware that we spend a lot of our time teaching courses in various functional areas like accounting and marketing. And our goals in areas like accounting are to get our people through the CPA exam so they can have successful careers. So there's not a lot of focus on integrated business subjects. There's not a lot of focus on these big topics such as inequality, even though they are really important topics for the world, and even though they have a major impact on business. It may surprise you, I've listened to all of these remarks. I don't find myself in disagreement with anything I've heard. I think we're roughly on the same page. So what do we do in the business school? Let me mention three things. First of all, at the undergraduate level, I'm prepared to speak on what we do because I'm the person doing it. We have an undergraduate junior-senior honors program, of which I'm the director, and there's a senior level honors seminar. And that honors seminar starts out after an introduction to the case method, and I do cases, that's why I don't have PowerPoints up here. It starts out with an introduction to the case method, and on the second week, we spend the entire week on the subject of inequality. So we use, not surprisingly, a Harvard Business School case on inequality, a general case that defines what inequality is, talks about the causes of inequality, the social effects of inequality, and I follow that up with a case involving San Francisco and what inequality has done to San Francisco. And the case starts out with a scene at a bus stop in a important area of San Francisco, picking up the rich people that are going to work at Apple and Google and the other places in Silicon Valley from their expensive homes in San Francisco, and how unhappy the people that used to live there and are barely hanging on to living there feel about having been crowded out by the wealthy. The approach of this particular course is to present the students with the cases. They read the cases and we discuss them. So the bulk of the learning, the bulk of the information they get is on their own. We hope that we will interest them in this subject. We hope they can learn to talk about it. Many of our students are on the conservative side. We hope that they'll have a little broader view after they take it. The course is also followed up by a senior honors seminar, and we hope that it piques the interest of some of these students in doing research on inequality. But it's very difficult to go in and preach at them. They aren't too inclined to listen, so we try to present the information and see where it goes. And in general, they've been pretty receptive. We follow this up with cases on countries like South Africa, where we see that income inequality, the related diseases, especially AIDS, some of the foolish policy approaches that have been taken in that country toward AIDS, make it difficult for the country to grow. And we generally, as we go through the different countries, Brazil, so on, we talk about Gini coefficients. It's only in our focus on the U.S. that we talk about the upper 1%. That doesn't seem to be so popular internationally. So that's at the undergraduate level. At the MBA level, we have a required course in the global economic environment. I teach that course, other people teach that course. We've got quite a few sections. Everybody does country cases from Harvard. Everybody talks about inequality, and we emphasize that if there's too much inequality, it can really be a problem for business, that it's going to lead to election results that businesses aren't going to like. It's going to lead to more taxation, higher minimum wages, and that sort of thing. And that one of the smart things for business to do is try to be strategic about that sort of thing. So for example, we've recently seen Walmart raising their salaries, minimum wage to $9 an hour, going to $10 an hour next year. Certainly progress over $7.75, buck an hour doesn't seem like much. The real question is, what's the basis for this? Is this a strategic shift? Is it aimed at getting a little higher quality labor in there and perhaps some substitution of capital and a lower level of employment? Or is it truly out of the goodness of their heart? They also recently announced that they're going to do a major stock buyback. Is that a prelude to the family buying out the public shareholders so they can say, we're not going to worry about this anymore? I don't know. but we talk about these things. The third thing we do has sprung up mainly from our MBA students. Our MBA students, believe it or not, are very interested in social projects and social value creation. And that interest has led to the formation of a Center for Social Value Creation at the Smith School. So a lot of our students' projects involve how businesses can create social value at the same time they're creating private value, and how we can generally add to the understanding of sound business practices by nonprofit organizations or other various alternatives to capitalism. So I'm through on time, always a worry. I constantly tell my students when they're doing a presentation, you got to finish on time, so that applies to me as well. Thank you.
Hey, first I want to thank Judy Markowitz for the invitation to speak here, and to Lily for her organization and answering all my emails late last night when I started to think really about the logistics here. I am delighted to have this opportunity to speak. In my view, this is one of the most significant topics in contemporary American society, if not in the world. The topic is not new, without a doubt. This is a very old topic. And my first recollection of its astounding impact was in the 1970s when I read The Other America, a book in 1959. And The Other America was about poverty. We were looking at poverty by Michael Harrington. And then in the 90s, when we started to read things like Savage Inequalities by John Cazole, and began to see the impact of poverty or income inequality. So this topic is very close to my heart because I have spent my entire life looking at poverty and race, ethnicity, gender, and class. I want to start out with what is the problem. The problem, I think, relates to two amazing characteristics of the American national character. And it's reflected in all our disciplines. And these two characteristics are the historic amnesia of the historical incorporation of groups, and its aversion to speak of constructs such as class, race, and ethnicity. So I want to begin with the fact that income inequality and the wealth gap were formed by the historic incorporation of what can now be termed involuntary immigrants. Slavery of African Americans, land takeover of Mexican Americans, colonization of Puerto Ricans, and land takeover of Native Americans and American Indians, where we observe the greatest income inequality and the greatest wealth gaps. These inequalities are reflected, as we have heard, in health status, in mortality, in morbidity, in educational performance, and in my most recent study, in faculty representation in higher education, particularly in elite institutions. So today I want to provide an overview of the facts and data, very simply, on income by race, ethnicity, and gender, and wealth, and the income gaps. One of the things all too often, and why I'm excited about today's discussion, and we'll try to be quick, is that we often speak from narrow experiential perspectives and universalisms based on these idealized democratic vision that America brings and that we try to reach. So I want to break down this a bit for all of us. Let me see, how do I do this? So while income inequality is significant in itself, recent evidence suggests that inequality is worse if wealth is taken into account. So we cannot look at income inequality without looking at wealth. They are both highly correlated. So wealth is more unequally distributed than income. And wealth constitutes a family's net worth of all its assets over its debt. The total assets include both financial assets, bank accounts, mutual funds, stocks and bonds, home ownership, vehicles, etc. And total debt includes mortgages, other secured borrowing, etc. What does wealth provide that income does not always provide? Wealth is sort of the repository of money that we have, provides financial security, contributes to political power, and many times is used to produce more wealth. So let's look at the wealth gap first in earnings, because earnings is one of the issues of income inequality. Essentially, first thing we see is a gap between men and women, where men make approximately $12,000 more than women on a median level. Asian women make 45, and then we look at gender. So when we look at gender, there are very clear differences in the gender income gap. These gaps are related to education level, and again, to wealth and other assets, and where you go to school, and how your family wealth can support you. When we look on the racial ethnic gap of family wealth. Now, in my view, we cannot talk about wealth or income inequality without looking at who is more disadvantaged than the other group, because otherwise we have a homogeneous grouping which does not allow us to define the problem. So we look at family wealth. Black and Latino families have consistently over time have lower median family incomes and lower median family wealth. So for whites, and then we look at the changes from 1989 to 2013, which some of my colleagues here talked about, but we see that over time, over the last 20 years, and this has been historic, the gap between Latino and Black families and white families has not changed significantly, and Asian families are in the middle. But they have also had the largest increase in reaching higher wealth. Another important thing is, who are the families that have no wealth, but have debts that exceed their assets? These are poor people. These are people who have no backing for their financial assets, who have limited economic stability and limited financial security. So for white families, about 18.6%, and we cannot forget that a significant portion of working class white families are also poor and have no wealth. Black families, 34%, and Latino families, 36%. Now the data is not broken down by Latinos, but you may all know that about 68% of the Hispanic population, which is 17% of the United States, are Mexican Americans. So this really reflects Mexican Americans. Now what is the impact of the Great Recession on family wealth? The greatest impact was on Latino families, and the second greatest impact was on Black families. And a lot of this impact had to do with housing and real estate. And Prince George's County is a very good example of a wealthy African American community that lost many of its assets due to the housing market. Home ownership rate is one of the biggest assets also in wealth. And white families are 1.5 times more likely to have housing than Black and Latino families. But even among those Blacks and Latinos who have housing, they tend to live in areas where the house is worth less, more segregated, less desirable, and what one of our scholars has called communities of low opportunity. Now, I'm just gonna go back here for a minute. Let me just say that solving the issue, first you have to know the problem. So the complexity comes in part in looking at wealth and what we do not talk about in the United States. Many people develop financial stability through help from their families, where wealth is accumulated. Many poor people, because they do not have health insurance, because health insurance is expensive, because they have not gone to good schools, all of these issues are part of the problem. I am doing a study currently, so this was very apropos, on Latino entrepreneurs. What we're trying to figure out, if we can develop business school, if we can develop businesses, will that help the Latino community, especially the women, to have larger incomes, larger assets, and the ability to transmit assets and wealth to their children? Now this is going to be at 3 levels, as we know. We're going to interview women to figure out what inspired them, what keeps them going, what are their strategies to go on, what resources they use, where were the barriers? Because we don't know. There is absolutely no data that we know of an understanding why there are so few African Americans, blacks, I think it's 5 to 6% entrepreneurs, and Latinos are right in there also. We keep talking about the immigrants who have these businesses, but Latino immigrants tend to be a very small portion of this. So to solve the issue, we need to know the problem. To know the problem, we need to get the data. We need to go down to the community and ask them. And clearly, to solve the problem, we need to have universal health care. We need to have other non-cash benefits. We are, maybe my colleagues know the number, we are 25th or 30th, somewhere in between there in the world in terms of income inequality, which has to do a lot with lack of universal services to build these communities so that they could have a head start. So I believe it is time for us, since income inequality has come up, to face the issue head on. We know the problem, we know how to solve it, and hopefully we can move forward and do something. Thank you.
So we have 5 really interesting presentations, and we do have they all not only gave interesting presentations, but actually kept to their time. So we actually have quite a lot of time for questions or comments. So would anybody have a question?
So thank you all for that great presentation. I was thinking here, for each of you, I guess this question would be for solutions. If you can talk briefly about what you see are solutions to income inequality and how the everyday person, student, can contribute to those solutions. So when we talk about banking regulations through a Glass-Steagall Act and how we can help, in terms of regulating banks, bills come out, what should we look for, public policy. I know for Prince George's County, they had this program called Triple Play, in which people could get money to get a down payment on a home to go ahead and be able to stabilize and have some not just income, but have property. People have wealth, to build wealth. And so from each of your perspective, if you're talking to a student, what can a student do in terms of being educated about this issue, and in action, what can they do day to day?
I'll start. Okay. We'll go down the table. So in my mind, the first thing is stigma and racism. And I think right now we see, in terms of the police issues, that continues to be a very strong characteristic of our society. And how we solve that, I think, is through the dialogue that's been started. I'd say the second thing is minimum wage. Anybody who has a job should be able to be paid appropriately for that job. And also, Ruth mentioned healthcare. I think we're totally on the right track with Obamacare. We definitely have to fix the problems, but it's conceptually the right idea.
Jobs, and jobs. If I were to summarize, get involved in and advocating so that people can to enable people to earn decent incomes and to help to organize their lives around gratifying remunerative work, number one. And that means, of course, obviously minimum wage increase and so on. And what we do in the United States, of course, is when you can't do something at the national level, you go down and you try to do it at the state level or the local level. So that's why we have a living wage movement in the United States, because you can't do something in Washington, so you go to Baltimore or San Francisco and try to do it there. But that's, if I were to give a sort of a short answer, jobs, and then secondarily, educational opportunity, consistency of education and training. It doesn't mean college for everybody, but it means training for remunerative work, gratifying remunerative work. So whatever you can do to advocate, elect, speak out on behalf of those things, that's what we should do.
So I already said some economic policies that I thought would be positive steps in the right direction. Things like large increase in union representation, making unionization law is much easier. We have it's very difficult to form a union in the United States. It's a lot easier in pretty much any developed country in the world, with the exception of maybe Japan. I would say that, public sector jobs, increase the minimum wage. So there's a lot of things that we can do. I think the problem, however, is where do we get the resources from to do this? And I think that, there's tremendous amounts of wealth and income in the very, very upper echelons of our. I mean, the top 1%, it's 23% of the income. That's amazing. Holds. The top 10% has 90% of the wealth. I mean, so I think we need a large increase in taxation. And I think the taxation is for two things. One, to implement public programs, but the other reason is that a lot of the wealthy are now using their money to buy political influence, ideological influence, and also direct political influence. I'm thinking of things like the Koch brothers, who are spending $900 million. They've pledged to spend $900 million on the current campaign. That's as much as the Democratic and Republican parties are respectively putting in towards the campaigns. I mean, that's unbelievable, right? And so I think, unfortunately, we have a decent idea of what economic policies might be better than what we have currently, but we don't have a good idea of how politically to get there. And so I think that what we really need is political mobilization, and I don't really have as great of an idea of how to achieve that.
I don't think there's any one simple solution. Certainly education is important. When it comes to the labor market, jobs, et cetera, I think we want to be careful how much we put on businesses. Most economists are pretty much in agreement that if you're talking about a minimum wage of $10 or $12, that's probably going to work. Statistically, though, most economists start getting pretty nervous when you start talking about $15 or $20, that the jobs are just going to move. Same thing with respect to the Affordable Health Care Act. If that becomes a huge tax on labor, in other words, the companies are told that if you want to employ someone, you've got to provide them health insurance, they'll say, fine, we're moving to Poland, or we're moving to China, or we're moving somewhere else. You can't hold them back. So I think universal health care would be better than putting that tax on employers. So no simple solutions, but the experience of Europe has not been good with these heavy payroll taxes and making it so expensive to hire someone that the jobs just simply leave.
Well, thank you for that question. I think one of the first things the professors have to impart knowledge on differential privilege and differential power. I teach seniors in this school, 16 years now, and they come to my classes and they do not know these differences in privilege, in income inequality, in poverty rates, and what that means. So I think professors have to take a more active role in transmitting knowledge to the students, because you cannot take political action unless you know what the issue is and what the problem is. I think politically this is an important step forward for us as professors, to be acting in political ways by providing different perspectives. I think a minimum wage, I think it's $15.71, is very important. We talk about we don't have resources. We have plenty of resources. When someone can pay $10,000 for their dog to fix their leg, I think we have plenty of resources. I think we need universal health insurance. It is a long fight that we have on universal health care. It goes back to Roosevelt. We were the only country that pulled out of universal health insurance in 1935, and that's an important historical fact. And we are the only industrialized nation that doesn't have universal health care and that doesn't have daycare for children. And you cannot tell me that all the money we pay for all these third payer people doesn't take up all the resources that could be for the country. I think education, Lani Guarnier just wrote a wonderful book, The Tyranny of the Meritocracy. We need to address our education system as a mechanism for equality in this country. It cannot continue to be a testocracy, as she calls it, where only the elite get the best education. So I think all of you as students, once you have some knowledge, some understanding, can write and encourage your council people to advocate for different things, nationally and here. And the last fact I want to say, it has been shown that if we took 1% of all corporate profits in this country, we would be able to provide all these basic universalistic services to everyone. Thank you.
So I was a classroom teacher for 14 years before deciding to pursue my doctorate, and in both PG County and DC. And one of the reasons why I'm here is because in all of my work educating children from low socioeconomic backgrounds, I really didn't see that the educational system was moving inequality. And so from your perspectives of your different disciplines, have you seen any educational strategies that you've taken note of that you think might actually have the opportunity to move inequality?
Yes. There are plenty. I mean, they're in the community. And you as a teacher know, we keep blaming teachers, families, and children, but we need to look at the lack of resources. So as a teacher, you know that in low-income communities, education is paid by real estate taxes. What we just said is that houses in low-income communities tend not to be worth much, so you can't generate much real estate taxes. We need to have a more equitable federal system. One of the examples we give always, it takes $30,000 to keep a child in juvenile hall. In the prison system, $30,000 a year. And it takes $7,000 or $8,000 to give a child a good education in the Chevy Chases of this country. So how do we make our decisions? How do we make our priorities? And it's unfortunate. So there are models, I think, in the community where you bring together dedicated teachers, where you pay them a good salary, where you give them resources, where they have access to counselors for these kids. There are models throughout the country. But I think that there has to be a political will. The charter schools, I think, unfortunately, has undermined the entire role of public education. Because again, you're developing schools with limited resources in low-income communities. So as long as we have schools that are low-performing because they don't have resources, rather than defining low performance by the children and or the teachers, we cannot promote equality in this country.
Well, hold on a second. One problem though is that schools aren't the entire, the school institution can't do the whole job. Part of the problem is a lot of kids go into school ill-prepared to do school, no matter how high quality or demanding or creative the school is, or how creative or energetic teachers are. The problem is broader than that, and schools are only one element in the overall educational enterprise, and that's a big part of the problem. You can't, quote, fix the schools and expect to fix educational outputs by doing that. Second thing I would say is that more recent work on charter schools suggests that there's a kind of a mixed story. There are some very high-performing schools.
Yes.
But one of the problems you get in education is that the challenge of doing system-wide reform that reaches all the schools. As you all know, you have magnet schools and special programs, and they work great for the kids who benefit from them and who are prepared to benefit from them. The problem is that instead of sort of reaching out beyond those magnet institutions, what tends to happen is the magnet is a magnet in a kind of perverse sense, in that all of the resources and attention comes into the school and into particular schools, and they leave as sort of islands of excellence and leave lots of kids and lots of families much more poorly served, I think.
Yeah, you're right, but it's all income inequality though. I mean, if the neighborhoods, if the families are poor and the kids are hungry, and the families don't make a decent wage, don't have income, they live in a poor area.
Right.
So it's all related.
Right, exactly. There's a broad context here. You can't fix an individual school you've got a lot going on. Kids are coming out of very disorganized and sometimes dysfunctional families, neighborhoods, peer group settings, and so on. And we've known this for a long time. This is not me revealing this suddenly to this group. You know this. We all know this. And so we make demands of schools as institutions that they can't possibly live up to, because the seat of the problem in many ways is elsewhere. So schools are one element. School institution is one element, but there's a lot of other context. Yeah.
So earlier, you actually said, I think, that in some of the Northern European countries that have high security nets in terms of their systems, that they still remain productive. And to me, the reason why I said racism initially is because of our racist history, we systematically did things in a policy way that kept certain groups from obtaining wealth, from actually getting homes, keeping wealth over time. And even if we became race neutral at this point, we've got to make up for a past disadvantage that we created in this society. And until we can actually address that, and it has to do with income and education and ability to accumulate wealth, I don't think we can change education, because it's all embedded in the same social fabric. And we tend to be very, in this country, compared to other countries, resistant to social programs. And I think until we work this through, we don't really have another choice if we want to overcome some of these issues.
So, I mean, I think we've is there a headline? So I think we spent a lot of time trying to fix the wage system through fixing education, but I think actually it's probably easier to do the reverse. It's a lot easier to get people to focus on school if they have an idea that when they get done, they're going to be able to get a good paying job. And there is substantial ability. The best research on the minimum wage shows that minimum wage has no discernible impacts on increase in the minimum wage, no discernible impacts on employment. So labor demand elasticity is about 0 or minus 0.1. And yes, so I see some puzzled looks. So it turns out if you look at counties that are in states where one state raises the minimum wage, the other state doesn't, and you look at, you compare counties which experience an increase in minimum wage, the county that didn't is bordering and very similar economically, is a very good control. And it turns out when you look at that, you can actually reject even pretty small negative effects of employment. So I think that we really need to shift the wage structure. And I'm not arguing against education. I think that's a good idea too. But I don't think that we're ultimately going to get all that far by just looking in the educational system. I think we actually have to fix wages themselves. And I think we will ironically find that if we fix the wage system, that will go some way towards fixing the educational system.
Did you? I think we have time for maybe one more quick question.
Oh, so as somebody who grew up in the 50s when we did have that 91% top tax rate, and when I could go to college for free. Oh, and I was taught so much more in my local Brooklyn schools than my daughter was in a school actually Prince George's County School, but Eleanor Roosevelt High School, which received an award as a National School of Excellence while she was there. A third of the math that I was taught disappeared, and lots of other things. The education is much less than it was when I went to school. But major thing I want to say is, well, first of all, it's happy 51st anniversary of the war on poverty. You may not have noticed, but Ronald Reagan commented on that when he said we fought a war on poverty and poverty won. To be more accurate, Ronald Reagan and team fought the war on poverty and his team won. And so he broke the unions, and that greatly increased poverty. There was the international trade agreements crushed the American industrial corporations, which tremendously decreased the number of good-paying jobs. Also, it forced, and then there's also, I guess, with taxes and such. How do these things play into the inequality?
Would anybody like to answer that?
If I understand what you're saying, you're talking about these historical, our historical experience. So,
Powell memorandum.
Yeah, Lewis Powell, yeah, I know. Professor Jerry Dancis and I are old friends and acquaintances. We go to lots of things together. These things are multicausal, as you know, complex, of long duration. And so what we're trying to do is figure out some areas where we can get some kind of traction. And that's sort of what we're up to in school public policy and what those of us up here are trying to do. We're all saying different versions of the same thing, which is that there are a lot of different pieces of this puzzle, and putting it all together is going to take a long time, a lot of energy, a lot of work. It will not be easy, and it's not going to be a project to be completed in any of our lifetimes. Again, I mentioned in passing the significantly anti-statist political culture that characterizes the United States. I'll give you one little anecdote, and this is kind of says it all to me. I'm doing some research on Mississippi. I came across the story of a progressive governor in the early 1980s who said who wanted to create and ultimately did create all-day kindergarten in Mississippi, which was, I think, the last state in the country to create all-day kindergarten, not surprisingly. And one of the problems was, and I will give you a kind of emblematic quote, which was a guy who said, I don't want to spend my money to create a babysitting service for blacks. That kind of attitudinal foundation is a big part of what we're pulling against.
I think that probably, we should probably move on at this point. I think there will be an opportunity afterwards for people to talk further, ask further questions, but let's applaud our speakers. There never seems to be enough time to answer all the interesting questions that come up, and we apologize for that. For the last part of the program, 4 librarians are going to come and speak briefly about resources for the study of income inequality. The 4 librarians are Selena McDonald, who is our government documents and maps librarian, Kelly O'Neill, who is at the podium right now. Do you want to go first, or are you over here? Okay, Kelly is our Geography and Geographic Information Systems librarian, Kelsey Corlett Rivera, head of the library's Research Commons, and Carl Nilsson, who is a librarian for data management and curation. They will be talking briefly about resources that we have for the study of this subject.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our speakers. Really engaging conversation and topics. Really great to hear about all of the research going on. I'm Kelly O'Neill. I am the Geographic Information Systems librarian here in the libraries. Along with income inequality, there's all sorts of different tools we saw today on how to research this topic. One tool I would like to just offer a brief demo on, Geographic Information Systems. So this is just a basic web mapping application I'm bringing up that really highlights income inequality in our region. So if I pull this over here, we have our campus is right in here. We have very low income for our campus, which is not surprising, so that's a bit of an anomaly in this discussion. Most undergrad students, right, they don't make very much. So if we look at our dividing line here in DC between Northeast and Northwest, we can see a lot of resources over here for income in terms of Northwest. We have our Chevy Chase neighborhood in here that was discussed earlier, so median household income of 132 versus over here 36, 37. And of course, housing prices go along with that, and then funding for schools in terms of taxes, as discussed, goes along with that as well. So this income inequality really trickles down to all aspects of life. It's not just about the income itself, it's the impact that that income difference has. So just looking at this divide, we can see our capital beltway around here and our interior of the beltway generally lower. As we move out to these suburbs over here, even in Prince George's County, much higher incomes as compared to inside the beltway.
What about DC?
Oh, well, we'll go back. That's where I was before. Hang on. This is DC. This is our little diamond shape, so north of the river here. So this was our northwest and northeast, and you can really just see that dividing line coming right down. This is by zip code, so of course it's not a completely straight line. And then the difference again between Montgomery and Prince George's County. So we can see these lighter green. I can bring up this legend here so you can see what the numbers means. The lightest green up to the darkest green. Let me close that so you can see. We move over here to Montgomery County, our Chevy Chase, as I said, Bethesda, Rockville, and then over into Northern Virginia, Great Falls, 200K. So it's a very stark difference in income. And the same can be seen as we move up toward Baltimore as well. So anyway, geographic information systems is a great tool to highlight spatial differences, spatial pockets of income inequality. This could also be paired with a temporal study to show an animation of these maps through time to see how that inequality might have changed as well through time. That's all for me.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Cool. Okay, I'm losing my voice a little bit, so I actually need a mic for once in my life. My name is Selena McDonald. I do U.S. government information, government documents specifically, criminology, criminal justice, and law. When Lily told me my task today was have 4 minutes to wow you guys, yeah, I kind of laughed to myself and said, yeah, that'll work. So I'll basically just say kind of how I can help people, because if I tried to show you guys all of it, I think your heads would explode the same way mine has been. For the last couple of months, I've been working on a book on data and statistics, and it's amazing just how much is out there. I end up concluding by saying, ask somebody, and I would like to encourage everybody to ask me. For example, of all the federal agencies, there's the big 13. There's like 87 other ones that collect data and statistics, and they don't always communicate with each other. I was helping some students last week who wanted to meld census demographic information with criminal justice statistics from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and the two don't communicate. But luckily, I was able to find a document that tells you how to make them communicate with each other. So I think what I would like to wow you guys with is by saying, I've got an open door, and there's a lot of amazing resources out there, books that can tell you how to find books about statistics. Literally, that's what I was crawling through yesterday. And it's really amazing beyond just what Kelly has there. You can see with the maps, you can see a lot of things where you can cross-tabulate poverty and income inequality with crime out in society. And it pops up everywhere. I think somebody mentioned police shootings and various other things that we see going on where income inequality really does affect what's going on there. And so I would say, if you're like me, and I always hear presentations or read articles and I go, hey, where'd they get that information from? I want to fact check it and then argue with my family. I would say, come find me and I will help you at least comb through the big 13 and several others. And if I cannot do it, I will figure out a way. That's kind of my policy. If I can't do it, I'll at least tell you why not. Or I will just figure out a way around my inabilities and help you anyway. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Carl Nielsen. I'm a librarian here. Unlike some of my other colleagues, I work on something that's a little bit of a different issue, but I think one where the libraries can provide a lot of advice and assistance. And I'm head of a new program called Research Data Services, and I'm going to just give you a really brief introduction to that, some of the problems that we work on, and some of the opportunities that we have. We've been talking to faculty in various disciplines all across the campus about data management for a little while, and one of the things we've heard is that managing data, all the organizing and documenting and reformatting and restructuring and recoding and cleaning and storing and otherwise retrieving is consuming more and more time. And that's time that I'm sure pretty much everybody in the room will agree should probably is best used for analysis and communicating findings and things like that. And some people will say, well, the problem is that there's a lot more data. There's a lot more data being generated from contemporary sources, and there's a lot more sort of historical data that's being digitized now and that's available. And other people might point to the sort of complexity or heterogeneity of data sets, particularly in interdisciplinary research, as being one of the reasons that data management seems to be occupying people's time. So when we talked to faculty, we heard that they were spending so much more and more time and energy simply managing data, and it struck us that that is probably in quite a few cases a misuse of faculty time. We really want faculty to be spending their time on the sort of the heart of the research question. One might sort of agree that even for graduate students, that data management is not the best use of their time. So people are keen to do research, so let's put them to work on that problem. And so our Research Data Services program is an experiment in taking some of the data management burden off of faculty and off of graduate students and putting it onto the libraries, who have a tremendous amount of experience and expertise managing information assets. And so by analogy, we want to try and take some of that experience and expertise and put it to work on research data management. And so we provide faculty with some guidance and project consultation and even hands-on technical assistance on various aspects of data management and what we call data curation, which we view as the effort to increase the utility and value of data over time. So it's not just a static resource, but something that increases in value. We're especially concerned with the long-term preservation of data, and we work on the things like public access to data produced by researchers. As probably many of you in this room know, public access to data is increasingly important to funding agencies and journals, and so we help faculty figure out how to meet some of those new requirements. So we have a number of pilot projects with various departments or research teams to figure out where we can put our expertise to use for their benefit. And some of these projects involve things like running and managing databases. Some involve publishing data online. Some involve actual software development to create novel sort of research applications. And some involve taxonomy and documentation and some of these things that librarians are very good at. And I just want to sort of extend an invitation and say we'd certainly like to put our experience and expertise to work on some of the areas of research that touch on income inequality. So two thoughts when it comes to income inequality in particular: the construction and maintenance and dissemination of say, reference data sets, perhaps longitudinal data products constructed from various secondary sources. It's incredibly useful to have data sets that are stable over the long term in terms of their measures, in terms of their units of analysis. And of course, there are a lot of organizations working on this problem, but we know that access to things like administrative data from government sources is sometimes capricious. And we also know that funding for statistical agencies, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is sometimes stagnant or declining. And this puts some of these data sources at risk. And so it might make sense for us to think about, as a university community, about how to take some of that data archiving and into our own hands and take responsibility for it, particularly for those data sets that we've created here, the researchers have created at this institution. And I think that's an opportunity for partnerships between faculty and libraries will really pay off. Another Another issue with respect to income inequality, and I think this is perhaps evident from some of the talks today, is that sometimes these data sets involve such heterogeneous mixes of data. So if you think about taking social media feeds and combining that with administrative records and combining that with geospatial information, you get into something that requires a variety of expertise in order to carry out the sort of management of it, the efficient management of it, because you've got metadata problems and restructuring problems and record matching problems and things like this. And that's another area where the libraries has a diverse array of experience and expertise. And so if what I've described here is as a sort of a set of problems and some opportunities to solve those problems that interest you, I'd be very happy to talk to any of you, and I extend that invitation to anyone in this room as well. We're very easy to get in touch with. We have a page on the library's website, which is merely the library's URL /data, but you can always just get in touch with any one of the librarians who work at the University of Maryland, and they'll pass my contact information on to you. Thank you.
That was an excellent segue. Thank you, Carl. So I am Kelsey Corlett Rivera, the head of the Research Commons, which is a relatively new initiative here on campus. We are currently primarily virtual, so you can find the Research Commons, and right here over under our left menu is Meet Your Librarian. So each department on campus does have a dedicated subject specialist. So from this page and various other places on our website, you can go ahead and get in touch. I'm just going to zoom out a bit here. So we can help you with a number of different things. We can put you in touch with specialists like Carl, and we can help you get the information that you need. You can find both Kelly and Selena's contact information up here. So we do have some other newer services that the Research Commons is rolling out, such as statistical consulting. So if any of you are working on projects that you just maybe aren't familiar with the statistics, haven't done it before, by all means, check that out. We have a new service where we can help you get data sets and text corpora. So if there's something out there that your department just doesn't have the cash for, or for whatever other reason, we could help out with that. And we are also in the business of sponsoring events like this. Research Commons is nominally the sponsor for this event, but I will say Lily did all the work, so I'm not going to try to take her credit. But we want to try to get folks in the same room to talk about issues like this. The libraries are very much a neutral zone on campus. We're not affiliated with the college. We don't have a discipline. We are a good space to get together and talk about issues like this. So keep an eye out for future events of this nature, and remember that we can help connect you with the resources that you need. So thank you, and I'll give it back to Eric.
Okay, this does conclude the formal part of the program, but I guess I hope people will talk a little bit afterwards. There's still a little bit of food left, I think. Like everybody else, we want to know that you're here, so there is a sign-up sheet. So I hope if you haven't signed that yet, please do that. Where's the sign-up sheet? Is it back there? Yes, over there. Okay, please do sign that up, and again, look for further events like this in the future. And let's thank all of our speakers one last time for a very enlightening